Today I'm joined by these two beautiful women who inspire me so much. Marise Mboyo Mutua, Susan Sabet, who's from Rwanda actually. And I mean, the way we met was so serendipitous, you know, tracking you down into your factory, and my mind was just like, whoa, you know, instantly. And not just because of the factory, but because simultaneously you had everyone's dream, you know, in terms of thinking about a factory. There was the nursery for the children. You had a, you know, different atelier for supporting young up-and-coming designers. And, you know, I was just like blown apart because that is the future. That's what we want to see. And Susan, you and I mean, we go way, way back, you know, you know, way back into your former life, you know, when you are still a magazine editor of passion. But fast forward that, you know, you established the Egyptian Fashion Council in Egypt, and yeah. So I've always really I'm really, what's the word, inspired by the way you sort of made that transition from being, you know, a storyteller to someone who's now invested in creativity and talent. Yeah. And going back to last night and, you know, the fashion show, anyone in the room, did you have a second to think about, you know, for a quick second, what went into the production of any of the garments you saw last night? Anyone? Okay. So we're going to start the conversation by talking about the true cost of African fashion. And that in itself is quite broad because it means different things to different people. To some people, it might be an opportunity. To some people, it might be the actual cost in terms of what goes into creating and making. So Marise, do you want to, let's start with you. What does the true cost of African fashion, what does it mean to you?
But so that, like I was telling you, when we talk about the true cost of African fashion, with my background, which is trading in garment and manufacturing, I actually see what it costs Africa not to capture the opportunity of manufacturing garments on the continent. So I've been in this industry for 24 years, sourcing mainly in China and Southeast Asia. And we know there are 92 million jobs that are leaving China, light industry jobs. For the moment, Southeast Asian countries are capturing most of those jobs. Central America, Africa is just starting, but we are a cotton growing continent. And for me, that is really the true cost, what it's costing us not to capture that opportunity. And fashion, and it's important that people understand that fashion is the beginning of the manufacturing. And I do see that because I have both hats. When I come with the hats of Pink Mango, the manufacturing, you employ 5,000 workers, 80% of women, you do get an ear. But when I come with Asante, the brand, the African fashion brand, it's not the same, the same ear that you get. So it's very important that our leaders and they support really the fashion industry, because when you invest in a talented African designers, you will also support responsible industrialization that is going to bring value addition on the continent and creating jobs as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And, you know, emphasis on the words value creation, you know, because that's the beauty of Africa fashion, the fact that you can create value from source to products. You can create value right from, you know, making the decision, for example, with cotton farming, to source your seeds like locally instead of, you know, within Africa, instead of importing seeds that have been, I mean, GMO touched and all of that, you know. So how do we create value? Value, and we realize that value at the end of the day is something that we lose because we oftentimes export, you know, raw materials before we finish the process. And which, you know, brings me to you, Susan. You know, I'd love your take on what the true cost of African fashion is, bearing in mind that you sit in a country that's quite peculiar. When we talk about industrialized countries on the continent, Egypt is number one. I mean, Egypt is number one in terms of cotton sourcing and in terms of, you know, apparel and garment manufacturing as well. So what does the true cost of African fashion, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, as you said, I mean, Egypt has a long history of textile and apparel production, and I mean, even dates back the textile industry to ancient Egypt. It already grew flax and cotton and linens. And today, the Egyptian textile and apparel industry is the leader in the African markets, and exports in 2021, for example, amounted to 3.7 billion USD. That represented 12% of Egypt's exports. And of course, having such a strong industry that comes probably also from the fact that we do the whole supply chain, which means we already grow the raw material, the cotton. We produce the yarn, we produce the fabrics, the fibers, and we produce the apparel, which is also due to the fact that we have manpower, skilled manpower, at a very affordable and a very competitive cost. So having this base of an industry, of course, for the young generation of designers that are creatives, that are aiming to create their own brand startup, this is a good base to look into to find production facilities. There, of course, sometimes you come to the challenges that we try to help as the council, we mentor, we support them, find small production facilities for them that give them the opportunity to have good quality at competitive prices to be able to grow sustainably. The same goes for the sourcing of the textiles. I mean, there's a big difference if you buy 100,000 meters of fabric or if you only need 1,000 or 500. So we try to tap into this and connect our industry leaders, the big manufacturers, the big producers, with the small designers, with the upcoming talents.
Oh, fantastic. And when you talk about talent, of course, instantly my ears just pop, you know, because, I mean, they're the future, you know. We can talk about industrialization all we want, but if we don't invest in the talent, right, you know, if we don't empower them, we're never really going to get to, you know, that place we want to get to, which is how do we think about using textile and apparel sector as a tool for poverty reduction and creating equality when it comes to women empowerment. So Maurice, coming back to you, how do you think we can create this ecosystem that we're hoping to have of thriving textile and apparel businesses that can positively impact the African economy? Because when people are talking about contributors to the African economy, I don't really think they look at fashion in that sense, or the textile and apparel sector. But what do you think, you know, needs to be done for people to understand that there really is an opportunity and where it lies? And yeah, if we're...
For this, I think I'll start by giving a statistics. Okay. The fashion industry is a $2.5 trillion US industry. Mm-hmm. Africa, the whole continent of Africa, accounts for less than 1%. Mm-hmm. Less than 1%. So when we've been talking a lot these 2 days also about AFCTA, a 1.3 billion market coming. So there's a lot of investment going into agriculture, but after we fed our people, we also need to clothe them. And for the moment, it's been accepted that the future of the future African is either going to be a factory worker. This is how most of the Western brands see us, because I work with a few Western brands. They see that's the future of manufacturing. So the African is either going to be a factory worker or a consumer. But nowhere in the equation, nobody is envisaging Africans as also producer of value-added products where we can have brands and leapfrog. In our industry, we can also leapfrog and do both. We can produce for Western brands because they have the volumes, they have the volumes that can help us create jobs, but also we can start selling using those manufacturing facilities that we are developing all over the continent now in these industrial zones, but also to produce African brands with added value and be on equal foot. So this is where I see the biggest opportunity, and we have to go through education, training, and investment, and most importantly, understanding also that I come back to that we can leapfrog and go from the first stage of value addition, which is going from growing our cotton to the yarn and the textile, but we can also dream about brands, the last part of the value addition, because all these big apparel groups, which are all billion-dollar groups, none of them have factories because they do subcontract in cheaper labor countries. So, but here we've got a blank page where we can do both, and I think this is where lies the future of Africa.
Thank you very much for that. And I think what makes Egypt, I keep emphasizing on this, what makes Egypt really special is, in that sense, they're far gone when it comes to industrialization, right? How do you think this is affecting, do the young designers and emerging talent, do they get the support that they need? Because if we have the big factories and, do the young designers that you're grooming, that you're working with, that you're nurturing in that sense, how much access do they have to, being able to produce locally, to being able to source? I mean, if we're talking about cotton, do they even have access to sourcing cotton locally, considering the fact that the textile manufacturing companies are probably the ones who can scale up in that sense?
Yeah, this is something that we're trying to push to encourage the big producers, the big manufacturers, to work with the young designers that need small quantities and small production lines. But before we get there, I think one of the things we want to also, and we need all of us, I think, to concentrate on are other obstacles, and that's where we need to engage the community and need the bigger industry to help us, which is, for instance, training, internships, before even the designer starts to be a designer, as a student, as a new graduate, work placement with companies that already have established a complete business structure, to learn, because most creatives are not business people. And for them to run a business is very difficult. They often don't have the money to find a business partner or hire somebody. So we are also looking into programs that, with hopefully some partners, where we can create a hub that offers law consultancy, PR, media, business planning, sourcing for these designers that could come to us. We help them till they grow so much that they can have their own team on ground. Because when we talk with VCs, with investors, they usually don't invest in a one-man show, in a single-person business. So providing such a hub, such a service to these young creatives, I think is very important, to put them then, of course, on the right track and then connect them with factories that can produce for them.
And talking about hubs, what coming back to you, bearing in mind the capacity of your factory in terms of how many, brands you serve, and the role that you've taken, the decision you've made to support like designers in your ecosystem with access to manufacturing, their products for sale. So do you want to speak to that a little bit, to tell us a little bit about how you manage both, to run your factory effectively for exports, obviously, but at the same time to be able to serve the need of your community, which is young designers across Africa? Well, not young, independent designers.
Independent designer. No, it really came from, the project of Asante came from the frustration. This is what I said, in 23 years of producing for Western brands. First of all, realizing the job creation potential of the garment industry and job creation potential for women. So I was always hoping that I could have an opportunity of that bridge. So came with the first project. The second one, like I say, being in a 2.5 trillion industry, less than Africa representing less than 1%, it was how can we find a way of helping our young designers to capture part of that opportunity. So Asante was born out of those frustration, and it's a spin-off project of the main project. So what we did is choose 12 designers from 12 countries: Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Ghana, Morocco, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, Congo, South Africa, and Angola. And the idea is to help them, first of all, I ask them, do you want to scale? Because wherever you go, you've got the usual suspects. You'll have the Swedish and I'm not going to say, you'll have the Swedish, there you go, Swedish H&M, the Japanese Uniqlo, but for a continent of 1.3 billion inhabitants, there is no one single African global brand. So we first asked them, do you want to scale? And those who wanted to scale, so now we are going to invest in infrastructure, both to help you in the product development part of your business, in the production, so we've got a manufacturing, you don't have the excuse of not having a manufacturing infrastructure anymore, but most importantly also shift their mindset from being a designer to going into the business of fashion, because these are two different things. And if you want to scale, so yeah, so this is how Asante was born, and the idea is that those 12 designers individually in their own countries, we would like to promote them to scale and become national champions in the business of fashion in their own country to inspire others. And if we are a catalyst for those 12 first ones, then individually they will inspire in their own countries.
Yeah, and yeah, talking about ripple effects, going back to you, Susan, it was really quite inspiring to see how your community really rallied around the first Egypt Fashion Week. And I say that you know, with a lot of emotion, because I know that, you know, there's always this constant push and pull between the industrialized Egypt and the Egypt that needs to, and the Egypt, you know, that's gradually beginning to support, you know, that growing ecosystem of young designers and artisans. Do you want to speak a little bit to support and, you know, how that works within your country?
Yes, of course. I mean, we like to celebrate our heritage. We like to celebrate our craftsmanship and elevate our craftsmanship. That I think is something very important, because you should also have your own DNA, and as a designer. Of course, then here you have a different, you know, you want to grow a big brand, a global brand that has to appeal more to the global market and that is producing big quantities. Whereas we also want to nurture the smaller designers that will work with the local artisan, so naturally you cannot produce large quantities, but elevating the quality, you can put a higher price point. So it will make your business sustainable. Yeah. It's going to be turn it into a luxury product eventually. And that is also very important. And as we were discussing before, then there is the point, do we have, as an Egyptian or an African or a Nigerian designer, have to be inspired and incorporate our DNA and our culture in our designs or not? Is that something that is expected from the global market, from the global buyer? Or can we just, you know, be creative in going with the trends, producing clothes that, you know, an American designer would design or a French designer?
Yeah, so I think that's why we always say that, you know, we need to capitalize on what the opportunity is, and that's our, you know, that's our unique selling point, so to speak, is the fact that, you know, we rely considerably on our heritage of craftsmanship. And, you know, but increasingly as we, as there's this clamor for industrialization and as there's this clamor to grow and to scale, the conversation that we, you know, the elephant in the room is, how do we ensure that African countries do not remodel what's happening in other countries, you know, where there's been conversations around, you know, people exploitation. Is that us? Oh, where there's been conversations around exploitation of people, or, you know, the triple planetary crisis of threat to environment, waste, and, you know, how do we ensure, Maris, you know, you sit right in the heart of that, you know, because you're, I mean, in Rwanda, Rwanda is one of the only East African country that, that, you know, stood up to the United States of America, literally, and to ban the, you know, importation of secondhand goods. And we've seen clearly what that did for your economy. So how do you balance that need to advocate for sustainability and the role it plays, and the role the textile and apparel sector plays in, you know, ensuring that people, planet, and processes, and of course profit play a significant role?
I think it's important that in all industry actually we find our own formula, because for the moment it's been a lot of copy pasting, and that's why I think some industry have not been able to thrive to the next level as well. And it's true that in Rwanda, the ban of second-hand garments is the reason we are here today, and we've been able to revive a textile industry, and also to think about other projects like Asante, which are our value addition. So I'll just say that we need to find our own formula. And coming back on what an African brand should be, I think we need to, it can be anything. First of all, it will depend on the designer, but for me, for example, in Asante, I personally made the choice of not necessarily having to be enclosed in a very strong cultural identity, but using organically grown cotton, sourced on the continent, transformed on the continent, creating jobs on the continent. That's the made in Africa for me. And it doesn't need to go through necessarily a print, so it's...
Yeah, and so on that note, that's great. I guess, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to us, and we look forward to seeing Asante in stores across the world.